The focus of the Liberal government in Ottawa has been on climate change and clean energy and clean technology now for a while. And then, of course, we have the election of Joe Biden and his government, his administration that started in January, and his huge clean energy, clean technology plan. So that raised some speculation about what the relative focus on fossil fuels versus clean energy and technology would be in the budget. And so I'm going to talk to Professor Stewart Prest of Simon Fraser University about that. So welcome to the interview, Stewart.
Well, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So what's your take on that? What is the relative emphasis in the budget on fossil fuels versus clean energy and technology?
Well, it's very clear that the federal government has seen an opportunity here, and it's an alignment of a political opportunity with, I think, some honestly held values of the party and its leadership with regard to the need to lean into clean energy and lean into an environmental transformation. And so we are at a moment of transition, as you mentioned. And on top of that, we can also talk about the final resolution of the carbon tax issue at the Supreme Court level. So we have a sort of finality about the federal government. Things are a little more stable. They can start to go ahead and put in place funds and plans for a transformation of the economy. And we're starting to see some of the actual monies put in place for that with regard to deep retrofits for homes and for other kinds of investments in the current economy to move it towards a low carbon economy. So there's been this desire for the government to move in that direction for a while. So they are now able to do that, and I think they're going to provide some nods in the direction of fossil fuels, but I don't think they're going to be substantial new investments. They're going to be more like afterthoughts to allow them to say that they are providing some political support for things like carbon capture, but they're not going to be deep investments on anything like the same scale we're seeing in other kinds of clean technology.
Yeah, my take on this, and see what you think, but I think the Trudeau government is all in on clean energy and clean technology. And you can see why. I mean, Ottawa wants to get its hooks into as much of that American business and money as it can that's coming out of the American government. But it's still at the same time, it has to nod to the oil and gas industry, and it has to help where it can. But I don't think the enthusiasm is there the way it maybe was, back in the days when the prime minister essentially bought himself a pipeline.
Mhm. No, I think that's right. I think the days of multi-billion-dollar new spending on any kind of oil and gas projects may be done for the Trudeau government. It's not really in keeping with their goals with regard to climate, for one thing, but it is also not really politically expedient. There is an opportunity here. We saw it in the last election where the Conservative Party currently is unable to put together a convincing narrative on the environment, on climate action. We have seen Aaron O'Toole try to move in that direction with his loyalty program, but there is a lack of credibility there when we see the party and its grassroots and the policy convention explicitly refusing to endorse a motion regarding the reality of climate change, the need for action on climate issues. And so this presents an opportunity for the Liberals to build on that urban base that they rode to victory in the last election. It was a close election for them, but that's what turned the tide. And so as long as they can keep that credibility gap between themselves and the Conservatives, they have every political reason to just continue to fund environmental issues on top of any kinds of strongly held values with regard to the need for climate action. So there's an alignment there.
Now, when the CPC climate plan was released recently, it really had big emphasis still on the fossil fuel sector. So we had clean LNG, blue hydrogen, and carbon capture and storage. And that was a big part of Aaron O'Toole's message. And so I wonder if that sets us up either the Liberals say, well, you know what, if that's going to be the CPC plan, we're going to go in a different direction and not emphasize that as much. Or do they compete with the CPC politically on that and continue to support those initiatives and take a little thunder away from the CPC? What's your take on that?
I think they'll do enough on those issues to be able to say that they're paying attention to them, so they're not totally ignoring carbon capture or blue hydrogen, these sorts of intermediary actions, but I don't think that's where the action is going to be for the Liberal government. It's enough to say that we are not ignoring these issues. We are going to be funding these efforts where they are proving fruitful, but just enough that they can dent that criticism from the Conservatives. I don't think, from a purely political calculus, the areas of the country that are strongly invested in those kinds of resources are not the kinds of parts of the country that are going to return to Liberals. So I don't think they're going to continue to invest political capital in this sort of quixotic mission to try to win over these rural voters, these Alberta voters who did not care that the federal government, as you mentioned, bought a pipeline. It didn't make a difference. So why continue in those efforts? The long-term plan is to move to a low carbon economy. So why not just fund those efforts?
I don't know how you feel about this, but it feels to me like Alberta's political star is falling. It has been at the center of, quote unquote, energy discussions in Canada for many, many years. And that there seems to be less and less interest in fighting over pipelines and fighting over the oil sands. It's like, okay, that's, a sunset industry. We're moving on. Clean energy and clean tech are where we're going. And so Alberta seems to be slipping a little bit in the, in political visibility. Say, what do you take? What's your take on that?
I think there is some truth to that, but to some extent it is an oscillating sort of thing. We could easily imagine that the Conservatives are eminently capable of winning the next election in Canada. And if they were to do so, Alberta would roar back to the forefront of those discussions because it is part of the stronghold of the Conservative movement in Canada at this juncture, and it has been for a considerable amount of time now. And so Alberta can be part of the conversation. There seems to be a real disconnect, and almost on the level of political culture, where those who strongly believe in environmental action are on one side of a divide, and they tend to be urban voters in much of the country, and they tend to be areas where the Liberals and the NDP do well. And there is a deep-rooted skepticism of things like action on climate and the urgency of those issues in this other part of the country where the Conservatives tend to do well. And because the urban areas outnumber the more rural areas, the more oil-dominant areas, a ratio of 2 to 1 in the country, until there's a language that allows those parts of the country to speak to the issues that are of concern to the more dominant, more numerous areas of the country, they're going to be left out of the conversation more often than not. It's just a question of mathematics, electoral math.
Stewart, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
Oh, always a pleasure. Thank you.